My friends, in this video, I'm sharing a story that I wrote for the Easter season. And I want to be clear, my story is fictional. It's a narrative wrapped around events that I believe to be profoundly real. I've tried to imagine what it might have been like for an ordinary man, a garden keeper, to witness the extraordinary moments in Gethsemane before Christ's crucifixion. Clearly, my words falter when attempting to capture the depth of this suffering. My imagination pales before the reality of what actually and truly happened that night beneath the olive trees. But this story represents my meager attempt to approach the unapproachable, to comprehend what cannot be fully understood by mortal man, and the willing sacrifice that forms the cornerstone of my faith. What follows isn't just a story to me, it's my testimony, offered with reverence and awe, and I invite you to journey with me into the garden to witness through one man's eyes what love looked like on the night before everything changed. The garden keeper. The last rays of sunlight gilded the hills surrounding Jerusalem, painting the limestone walls of the holy city with a warm amber glow. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his weathered hand, and he gazed at the darkening sky. Stars had begun to appear in the east, while the western horizon still clung to the day's final light. In the distance, the sounds of the city preparing for Passover drifted through the evening air. Voices calling, doors closing, the faint bleating of sacrificial lambs. Elias was not a Jew. He was a Syro-Phoenician who had settled near Jerusalem decades ago, and he remained outside of their religious observances, but he respected their traditions. His own gods had failed him long ago, and while he hadn't embraced the God of the Hebrews, he had come to appreciate the rhythm of life in this land. He found them to be good and conscientious people. Elias remembered listening to one of their traveling preachers 2 seasons ago. It was on a mountaintop, and thousands of others had come to hear him. He was a little bit startled that a Jew would teach to love our enemies and bless them that curse you. But tonight the Jews would now be gathering in their homes for their sacred meal. Elias was a worker. How many nights had his wife asked why he was so late? But only one who works the land and the groves knows that certain work has a season, and it needs to be done regardless of how tired he was. So tonight, as the Jews were gathering in their homes, this gentle gardener finished his work in the quiet solitude of the olive grove. Even though his bones ached as he bent to gather his pruning tools, he felt satisfaction. At 62 years old, every season seemed to bring new aches and pains. Yet, he couldn't imagine life away from these trees. For 20 years, he had tended this particular grove on the Mount of Olives. Elias had watched saplings mature into producers of the finest oil in Jerusalem, maybe even in the Roman province of Judea. The grove's owner, a wealthy merchant, prized Elias not only for his skill and understanding of the delicate balance required to cultivate truly exceptional olives, but also for the ability to foster friendships and loyal customers among the Jews. The Garden of Gethsemane, as Jews called it, meant olive press in their Aramaic tongue. The name suited the small grove perfectly. At the center of this old garden stood an ancient press, a massive stone wheel that crushed and harvested olives to extract their precious oil. Although the ancient press was still operable, most laborers in various groves on the Mount of Olives took their harvest to separate private presses. But all of them knew Elias as an old steward, or the garden keeper. They all respected and trusted him. Elias often reflected on the process, how something so valued required such violence to obtain. The first pressing yielded the purest oil, used only for sacred purposes in the temple. The second pressing produced oil for anointing, while the third created oil for common lamps. Nothing went to waste. Everything had a purpose. Tonight, he had stayed later than usual, securing the young branches that had been damaged by the unseasonable winds just 2 days prior. The branch of an olive tree took 7 years to bear fruit, and he couldn't bear to lose even one to carelessness or haste. His work lived in the rhythm of decades, not days. Tonight, Elias was tired. He walked a little slower. He had just placed his tools in the small wooden cart when he heard voices approaching from the city road. Instinctively, he stepped back into the shadows of the gnarled olive trees, whose bent and twisted trunks had served as his resting place for many years. Visitors at this hour, especially on Passover night, was unusual, and bandits were not uncommon. A group of men entered the garden. Light from their oil lamps and torches lit their faces dimly. Elias counted 12 as they passed. 11 followed one, who walked just slightly ahead. He could tell that these were not bandits. The leader's bearing caught Elias's attention immediately. It wasn't in his clothes, it was more in his movement. He seemed to move with certainty, with purpose, even authority. Even so, Elias could see the man walked with a weary tread, much like his own tonight, and even in this fading light, his face bore an expression of profound gravity. These men were definitely Jews. Their garments were simple, those of working men, not the wealthy or priestly class. But if they were Jews, why would they be out of the city in a grove of trees after dark on the Passover? This was not behavior he had witnessed among these people for decades of living among them. Certainly, this was unusual. The leader spoke to the others, his voice gentle, yet clear in the evening stillness. It belied his weary step. Sit here while I go over there to pray. Elias was captivated. What was it about these men, especially this one, the leader, that chased his weariness and sparked his interest? He selected 3 from the group and continued deeper into the garden. Drawing closer to where Elias stood concealed in the shadows, the gardener pressed himself against the ancient olive trunk. His breath shallow. He wasn't trespassing. This was his place of labor. But he felt suddenly like an intruder in a private moment. The 4 men stopped perhaps 30 paces from Elias's hiding place. The leader turned to his companions. And now Elias could see his face clearly in a shaft of moonlight. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with a short beard and features that somehow combined gentleness and strength. But what struck Elias most were the man's eyes. Even at this distance, they held such a sorrow that the gardener felt an unexpected ache. in his chest. A flicker of recognition flashed in Elias's mind, and then it vanished. Where had he seen this man? "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," the man said, his voice breaking slightly. "Stay here and keep watch with me," he said. Elias found himself holding his breath, pushing himself into the shadow, but listening with all the attention that he could summon. Something profound was happening, something beyond his understanding, but which demanded reverence. Elias knew instinctively that he was inside this man's personal space. He felt it inside himself. Even so, he could not draw himself away. He felt a need to listen, to understand. And if not his body, at least his soul desired to feast. Who is this, he wondered, almost aloud. The leader walked a little further, just beyond an outcropping of rock, and fell to his knees. This position struck Elias. This was clearly a Jew, but he displayed none of the formality of the Jewish prayers he had observed over the years. He had seen the priestly leaders praying in the streets. What he was seeing now was not ritual devotion. It was raw supplication. Elias looked briefly over at the three companions. They had settled themselves on the ground, their backs against the olive trees. Then this man began to pray. For minutes, he spoke so quietly that Elias couldn't make out the words. He caught words like sorrow, love, frightened. His head was bowed. He almost embraced the large stone that was next to him as if to gain strength. Then his voice grew stronger, carrying clearly through the still night air. Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. It was said with intensity, with raw emotion. He was weeping, but he remained quiet for several minutes. And then he began speaking quietly, whispering, his eyes closed, his head down. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. The man groaned. He gasped, as if he had been struck with a great pain. His head dropped further, almost to his chest. His jaw tightened. His muscles braced. He was in agony. Elias froze where he stood. Tears welled in his own eyes. Deep emotion stirred in his own soul. He had heard many prayers in his lifetime. Perfunctory devotions, desperate pleas, and thankful supplications, but never had he heard such naked anguish in communion with the divine. The leader's entire body seemed to bend under some invisible weight. After a long moment, the man's voice came again, quieter and strained, but with a note of deep yielding, even love. He was praying for others. Tears were on his cheeks, but his face reflected a strange joy while the muscles continued to tighten with pain. From behind the branches and leaves, Elias could not avert his gaze. All weariness had fled. Moments passed. Elias watched as the man rested and pushed himself away from the rock. He rose as someone with deep stiffness, like maybe the morning after someone has worked too hard. He moved stiffly as he returned to his 3 companions. They had fallen asleep, their heads nodding against their chests. Something like disappointment crossed the leader's face as he gently aroused one of them. He started speaking, but stopped, as if emotions would not let him speak. Tried speaking again, but he choked back his emotions. And finally he said, "Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" The question conveyed deep sorrow rather than rebuke. He placed his hands gently on the shoulder of one and smiled. "Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." This leader returned to his place of prayer. Again, he knelt beside the boulder. This time, the man bent over in agony, but he lifted his face toward heaven. Light seemed to fall upon his face. It seemed more than just the light of the moon. For several minutes, he held on to this large stone. He groaned, "Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." His prayer grew more intense, his shoulders shaking with emotion. Elias stood transfixed, his own fatigue forgotten. He knew this was a divine moment, but he could not understand it. The man was no longer speaking, just trembling, gasping, grasping for breath. How long, Elias could not tell. And slowly, the man seemed to relax. With effort, he stood again, and he walked again to his companions. Elias had almost forgotten that they were there, but this man had not forgotten. Again, they were asleep. This time he squatted down and he gently reached the hand of the man in the center and he woke him, and they all startled awake. And then this man who had been suffering said, "Simon, sleepest thou? Could not thou watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak." Each of the men sat up, and one stood and tried to waken himself. But the one returned again. This time, he went a little further. And this time, he fell not just to his knees, but fully prostrate on the ground. He groaned, "Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what thou wilt." With his head barely above the ground, his arms stretched out above his head, his fingers grasping in the soil, his prayer grew more intense, his shoulders shaking with emotion. Elias stood hidden, captivated. He dared not move. The man pressed himself into the earth. Elias had never seen such anguish. He would never be able to describe the suffering that he witnessed in this unique vision. He could only compare it to the olive press, the tremendous weight of a stone crushing the fruit to extract the most precious substance within. He groaned. An involuntary shiver ran through the gardener's body at the thought. What manner of burden could completely crush a man so completely? What invisible press extracted such anguish? It was as if the anguish rolled over not just his body, but crushed even his soul. The pureness of the fruit being released. As if in answer to his unspoken question, Elias witnessed something he would ponder for the rest of his days. A light, different from the moonlight, softer, more radiant, seemed to envelop the praying man. At first, Elias thought that his tired eyes were playing tricks, but the glow persisted. And within this light, a figure knelt beside the man. He wrapped his arms around his shoulders, even while the man was being crushed by this invisible, agonizing weight. The vision, if that's what it was, lasted only moments before fading. Tears streamed down Elias's face. His heart pounding in his chest. He had never considered himself to be a superstitious man, yet he found himself trembling. How long has this suffering lasted? He could not tell. Slowly, the light contracted around the being, and it was gone. But this astonishing man began to relax. His distressed face loosened. Although he wasn't smiling, his eyes reflected an even brighter light. His eyes smiled. And when he rose again, Elias noticed something that made him gasp involuntarily. The man's face glistened with more than tears. In the moonlight, Elias could see beads of sweat on his forehead. It carried a reddish tint, and these fell to the ground in great drops, staining the earth beneath the olive trees. Elias had seen something similar only once before, when an olive press had been tightened too quickly, and the tremendous pressure had caused some of the olives to extrude a reddish liquid along with their oil. This rare phenomenon was considered emblematic, even symbolic, by workers. They would say, the olives weep blood when the press is too great. Now this leader pulled himself to his feet. He now stood upright, taller, as if he had endured and conquered something incomprehensible to others. He returned to the three sleeping men. The leader's demeanor had changed. Though still sorrowful, a new resolve seemed to have settled over him. His voice carried clearly to where Elias stood. Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Elias followed the man's gaze toward the garden entrance. A crowd had approached with their torches, cutting harsh shadows through the olive trees. At their head walked another, Jewish man, dressed similarly to those he had been observing, but dressed with a little finer clothing. The newcomers moved with purpose. Temple guards with swords and clubs. This made no sense. Elias could not make sense of sending guards against what he had just witnessed. Surely this man had some power that he had not witnessed. Why would the man need a band of temple guards to seize him? Confusion and curiosity compelled Elias to quietly follow in the shadows. Elias was truly shocked at what happened next. It unfolded with such speed that Elias could barely process it. The man who had led the crowd approached the leader. He looked at the others, at the 11, then at this inexplicably powerful and gentle man, and then the guards. He appeared torn, but his eyes showed fear, not indecision. Infinitely long seconds passed. He stepped forward and greeted the man as Rabbi, teacher. Then, incredibly, he kissed him on the cheek. Something in the gesture made Elias' stomach tighten with disgust, though he couldn't have explained why. The guards moved forward to seize this man. The one of his companions drew a sword and struck out, cutting off the ear of a guard. Blood flowed through his fingers as he stepped back in pain. Elias winced at the sudden violence, but what followed astonished him even more. This man, he rebuked the defender. He reached out and he touched the man's ear. The bleeding stopped immediately, and his ear was made whole. "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me?" The leader's voice carried a dignity that seemed to fill the garden. His voice was not harsh, but unmistakably commanding. "Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." The writings of the prophets. The words echoed in Elias' mind. He had been around the Jewish temple and those who bought large amounts of oil. He had heard Jewish merchants discuss their prophecies when they came to inspect the oil. They spoke of a Messiah, a deliverer who would restore their kingdom. Was this what he was witnessing? Chills ran down his spine. His arms tingled. The thought seemed too enormous to contemplate. Finally, recognition came. This was the man who had taught on the hill 2 seasons ago. This was the man who taught peace. This was the man who fed them, even though they had seen no wagons of food. This was the man whom the guards seized. The guards bound the leader's hands, and he began to lead him away. His companions, overcome with fear, scattered into the darkness like startled birds. In moments, the garden that had pulsed with such intensity fell silent again, save for the whisper of the night breeze of the olive branches. Elias stood unmoving long after they had gone, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. Finally, his legs trembling with both physical and emotional exhaustion, he stepped from his hiding place and he walked slowly to the spot where the leader had prayed. The ground there seemed different somehow. A darkness that wasn't just a shadow stained the earth. Elias knelt and he touched it with trembling fingers. Moisture still clung to the soil and to the leaves of a small plant growing there. In the moonlight, he could see the reddish tint clearly now. Blood. He had sweat like drops of blood. over the next few days. Elias moved through Jerusalem like a man walking through a dream. Fragments of conversation reached him as he passed through the marketplace. He didn't understand most of what he heard. Hushed voices speaking of the Nazarene teacher's humiliation before Pilate and Herod, his brutal scourging at Roman hands, his stumbling journey through narrow streets beneath the weight of his own crossbeam, the brutal crucifixion of this man that he had watched in unmistakable agony and pressure. Women wept openly in corners. Men argued in fierce whispers about prophecies and kingdoms and betrayal. Then the chatter was silent for nearly 3 days. On the afternoon they called Preparation Day, darkness fell across Jerusalem at midday. Elias had been inspecting young saplings when this unnatural gloom descended over the earth. A shudder passed through the earth itself, causing the ancient olive trees to tremble around him. His instinct told him something had ended. He knew it with the same certainty that told him when a tree would bear fruit or when rain was coming. That evening, Elias returned to Gethsemane. The garden lay hushed in twilight shadows as he made his way to the spot where this man had knelt in prayer. Kneeling there himself, Elias reached out with work-roughened fingers to touch the soil. It still held darkness where blood-tinged sweat had fallen. The understanding broke over him suddenly. Not like dawn's gentle awakening, but like a flash of summer lightning that illuminate everything at once. The garden keeper had witnessed the first pressing of the sacrifice. Elias bent forward until his head touched the ground where the man had prostrated himself. The tears came, not gentle weeping, but great wrenching sobs that shook his aging frame.